The question is how I got involved in the Yasui story. And this might be the longest answer that I give, so don't be discouraged for asking a question, because I'll be briefer than this, but this requires a little bit of an answer. There were two parallel paths for me. One kind of a deeply embedded, and one just sort of more, not superficial, but more that sparked me. The deeply embedded part was, I took a graduate seminar in history when I was in graduate school called The American Character. And in this class, the informing idea of this class was to sit around and talk about what it means to be an American, which is not a question I ever thought of asking myself. But it was a very tough question to answer. What does it mean to be an American? One of the things that came out of the class was a lot of discussion of the immigrant past that we all share. And so leaving that class, I thought I would like to write about that somehow. I would like to somehow find a way to write about what it means to be an American, what it means to become an American, that process. And to not write a textbook, but to write a story about it. And then I went off and did other things, but this is the deeply embedded part. And I was in Eugene, this is where I live, in Eugene, and I picked up the newspaper one day, and there was a short news article in the newspaper that announced that a woman by the name of Michi Yasui Ando was being asked back by the University of Oregon to walk through the graduation ceremony that she had been prevented from walking through in the spring of 1942. So Michi, who was one of the, do you remember the photograph you saw of the tall girl so Michi was the older sister. She was a senior at the University of Oregon, and in the spring of 1942 would have been after Pearl Harbor, but just prior to internment. She was finishing off her senior year. And in those days, the graduation ceremonies were after dark. And there was a curfew for people of Japanese ancestry. You could not leave your house after 8 p.m., which, by the way, one of the other, not even by the way, because that sounds ridiculous, but one of the other Yasuis, Minoru Yasui, who was a lawyer in Portland, purposely got himself arrested to test the curfew law and to take it all the way up to the Supreme Court. But meanwhile, Michi was not allowed to go through her graduation, and then some 40 years later, the university invited her back, and I read the article, and I thought, this is a great story. It was just a little news story, but I wanted to write about it. And so I wrote a magazine story about it for the Oregonian used to have a Sunday magazine called Northwest Magazine, and I wrote a piece for that about a little bit about the Yasui family and about Michi coming back and what it meant to the family and why she was coming back and the internment. And a couple of my books have started with magazine pieces, and then there's a bunch of magazine stuff I do that never becomes a book. And I think that's sort of like a test for me that after I write a magazine piece, is there something still there? And this was a story that was very much still there for me after the magazine piece. And I had met so many of the Yasuis, and I wanted to pursue it. But basically, it was a newspaper story that started me off.
Next question. Way over there. Hold on. I'll come bring the mic. Or I'll take a question from somebody who's closer on the way.
Hi. The book itself, is it really a nonfiction and you just filled in some of the spots?
Is it really nonfiction?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely. Huh?
Yeah.
It's not a novel. It's really...
Well, it's called narrative nonfiction, which is what I do. And so if you mistake it for a novel, I take that as a compliment, because what I am trying to do is create three-dimensional characters on the page, have them say what they say, create scenes, make the past come alive the way one would do when writing a novel. However, this is all deeply researched, and everybody did exactly what I said they did, and it's all documented.
Oh, that's great.
And while you're going to the next person, I appreciate that question, because I think that, there have been so many books that have been presented as nonfiction, and that we've later found out were fabrication, especially memoirs. Even in my own town, I don't know how much play this got out here, but there was a young woman who wrote a book about being a foster child in South Central Los Angeles, and and the New York Times did a huge story on her on the front page of the style section. The book was to come out the next day, and it was then discovered that the entire thing was a fabrication. And there've been 4 or 5 pretty high profile, the James Fry book, A Million Little Pieces. And so I think that readers are smart to really question whether something is nonfiction, is fact. And those of us who write narrative nonfiction are very sensitive to this, and want you to be critical and be thinking, well, did she make this up? I have to tell you that sometimes one is sorely tempted, not not to make up something that everybody would catch you with. But here's an example. There's a scene in the book when Minoru Yasui leaves his office, his law office in Portland, and it's March 20-something or another, and he's walking the streets in Portland to get arrested, to test the curfew. And I have to tell you that I really, really wanted it to be pouring rain. And had I been writing a novel, it would have been pouring rain. Unfortunately, it was a balmy evening. And, and he didn't know that. I mean, when I was interviewing Min, he didn't remember that, but it's pretty easy to find out. A researcher can find out pretty easily what the weather was at any given place at any given time, so I did. And okay.
I think it's pretty cool that you started your book, or some books, from magazine articles. And I was thinking it might be interesting to explore sort of the ironic thing that our early immigrants actually sort of interred the original Americans in the reservations. Do you think that that would be a topic that could be a bridge sort of from what you just wrote?
Well, there are, unfortunately, startling similarities. I mean, there's patterns in history, and sometimes there are great patterns in history. There are success patterns in history, but then there are also these awful patterns in history. And the way that what happened to the Indians on the American Indians, the Native Americans, with forced marches and reservation lands, is really sets the stage for what happened to the Japanese during World War II, and it does not speak to our highest ideals, does not speak to the best in our characters.
Another question? Okay, back here.
Lauren, has there been 2 different editions of your book?
4.
Okay. Because some of us read it very close to when the first one was published, and then I'm just confused about the gaps.
The book was originally published in 1993, and it was a hardcover edition published by Random House. And then it was published in paperback, because hardcovers, you all know this because you're readers, they last for about a year. I mean, libraries buy hardcovers, thank you. But readers often don't. They wait for the cheaper paperback. And paperback comes out about a year later, so it came out as a Dutton paperback. And it was in print for, I think, 5 or 6 printings, pretty much. And then it was out of print. They weren't selling enough. And this is like a writer's tragedy tale that ends up in goodness. So I got the rights back, and I didn't think that there was, that much more oomph left in the book. It had already been published nationally. It had, I'd gone out on tour. It had been 5 printings, and so I gave the rights to Oregon Historical Society. They were starting a press, and I thought this would be a way to keep it in print. Not that they would promote it, because they had no promotion arm and they didn't know what they were doing. So I gave it to them, and about 8 months after I gave it to them, the press ceased operation. So then I got the rights back again. And then the wonderful librarians in the state of Oregon decided to choose this book, which was then kind of out of print, because the publisher, which was Oregon Historical Society Press, didn't exist any longer. And the new wonderful edition that some of you have with the lovely clothesline with the kimono on it was then published by Oregon State University Press. So, and it's had, a whole new life in the state of Oregon. That book is different from the original 1993 book and the paperback edition. Not the text itself, but I wrote a introduction, and then the governor wrote a preface or another introduction, and I also wrote some questions for people to think about at the end. And I re-interviewed Homer Yasui, who's one of the younger sons of Masuo, about his experiences. And so the transcript of that interview is in the back of the book, but that's the only difference.
I was wondering what the Yasui's family reaction is to all this continued publicity of their story in America.
Homer Yasui, who I just spoke about, was just at the Japanese Gardens with me last weekend when we did a special presentation of the book, and he was happily signing his name under my name. So he was pretty happy about it, I think. And Joan Yasui, who is the oldest of the 3rd generation. She was the daughter of Masuo's 2nd son, who's the one who came back to Hood River and whose family still has the Hood River orchards, has also been kind of coming, not behind me exactly, but at various places that I have been. She has also been to talk. So I think that they are enjoying it. I know that Lisa has been very pleased that a number of people have seen her movie, A Family Gathering, who were not exposed to it before. So I hope that was an important call.
How did you derive the name for the book? And the other one was, how receptive has Hood River been to your book?
The name for the book is pretty much just a creation of mine. It doesn't come from anywhere. It comes from my thought that perseverance is at the heart of this family story, as the heart of the immigrant story, and perseverance is a difficult word to put as a title. Plus, I don't know how to spell it. So stubborn seemed like a good word. I mean, I think people think of stubborn as being something bad, but I think of it as good. And so I had the word stubborn in mind. And the twig part comes from, it's sort of a nod to the agricultural side of this story and the family tree idea. So I just thought of putting these 2 words that don't normally go together to create kind of an evocative title. So that's the answer to the first one. The answer to the second one, interestingly, except in Hood River, where they wouldn't ask me this question was asked every place that I've gone. And I would love to have an exciting tale to tell you, but actually the librarian, the chief librarian from Hood River is here, so she'd know that this is not true. So the tale would be, yes, they tarred and feathered me and ran me out of town on the rail, or they put me on a windsurfing thing and tarred and feathered me and put me out in the Columbia. But I actually had I thought, quite warm reception in Hood River. One of the things that I read to you tonight, I did not read in Hood River. So I chose slightly differently what I was going to say there. But I think that the people who came, first of all, it's a self-selected audience. The people who would come to this are people who feel deeply about the issue and are not coming, to make trouble, I guess I would say. The other thing I want to say is that so I think it was a good reception. There were a number of people, and there were some very good questions, and I felt welcomed in Hood River. I had gone to Hood River in 1993 when the book first came out, and had read, hosted by the bookstore out there. I did get one question from somebody in the audience in Hood River that was unique to Hood River, I think, and that was a man asking why I thought something like this could have happened in this town that he loved. And it was really a heartfelt question, and it was interesting to try and answer to a Hood River audience, and it really made me think. So, yeah, and so I was very happy that Hood River was part of this, and I felt that it was a good experience, and no tar or feathers.
We have time for 2 more questions. Come right here.
So make them good ones.
I loved your passionate appeal for us to look at our values and to think about how we live and why. And so my question is, wouldn't this have been a loss to have just written a factual book without being able to motivate or inspire people through these sessions?
I think that there was an event yesterday at the library in which the woman who wrote the one that was selected for Oregon Reads, that was a children's book, asked the people, if you were to think back to the classes you took in history, what's the one word that comes to your mind when you think about history? Yeah, and that's exactly what the audience said yesterday, boring. So I think that when you try, that people love stories. That's how we learn about each other. When we want to know somebody, we share our story with them, and that is the way to get to people, I think, to care about issues. So there's this level in which you can write, and the facts can be startling, but if they're presented merely as a series of facts with no passion to them, no heart to them, no personal story. It's amazing how these very powerful and strong facts they just don't simply filter into our hearts. So I think that the challenge for me, not just with this book, but with pretty much everything that I write, is that there are some big ideas behind what I write, but I don't write the big ideas. I try to write the small story that connects people and opens up to the bigger ideas. I don't know what the law is in Oregon, so I'm not going to pretend to know. But I believe in California, if you're the child of illegal immigrants, you can't get into you can't go to a California state school as a California resident. the way children of other people can, because of your parents, because of something that your parents did. This is one of those patterns of fear of the other, of fear that somehow we're going to be, we who have our feet firmly planted on the ground because, we came here first, are somehow going to be diluted by these strangers. And that's kind of what I mean about, if you think about the pot and having the ingredients be diluted, then you can be scared. If you think about, there's another patch for the quilt, and won't that be a great patch? And let's just make sure that we stitch in that patch with that shared ideal that we, the older immigrants, have, and that person, the illegal, that person came here because of those same ideals. I mean, isn't that enough to have in common, I would say? I also want to say that well, never mind, I don't want to say that. I won't say that. I think that was all the questions, but nobody asked the question that I wanted to answer from the shameless self-promotion group of questions. So I will ask myself this question, which is, Lauren, what are you working on now? Thank you for asking. So I'll just say, even though this is a year away, so you can't run out to your bookstore, which I know you're all ready to do, but I'm just finishing a manuscript for a book called Something Unpredictable, and I do have a good answer about where that comes from. It's a lyric from a Green Day song. And it is it's based on the idea that the two worst times in a woman's life are when she is 13 and when her daughter is 13. Thanks a lot.